November 26, 1539. Istanbul. The air itself seems to shimmer with gold dust as the greatest wedding celebration the Ottoman Empire has ever witnessed enters its seventh day. Drums echo off marble walls. The scent of roses and amber fills courtyards where fountains run with sherbet instead of water. Silk banners bearing the Sultan's tugger flutter from every minaret. But inside a gilded carriage moving through streets lined with thousands of onlookers, 17-year-old Miriam Sultan sits perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her face a mask of composure that has taken years to perfect. If you could see behind the jeweled veil covering her face, you would notice something that contradicts all the magnificence surrounding her. Her eyes are fixed on nothing. She is breathing in a slow, deliberate pattern, the way someone breathes when they are trying very hard not to feel anything at all. In 6 hours, she will enter the palace of Rustam Pasha, a man 40 years old whom she has seen exactly 3 times in her life, always from a distance, always in the presence of dozens of witnesses. In 6 hours, the wedding festivities that have consumed 15 days and enough wealth to feed entire provinces will finally serve their actual purpose. And Miriam Sultan, daughter of Suleiman the Magnificent, one of the most privileged women on earth, is more terrified than she has ever been in her life. This is not the story you think it is. This is not a tale of oppressed harem women locked in dungeons, because that fantasy says more about Western imagination than Ottoman reality. This is not a story of empowered queens who ruled empires from behind screens, because that myth erases the cost of whatever power they managed to claim. This is the truth that exists in the uncomfortable space between those narratives, and understanding it requires us to hold to contradictory facts in our minds simultaneously. Ottoman princesses were among the most powerful women in the medieval world, and Ottoman princesses were systematically denied the most basic form of power that exists, control over their own bodies and futures. The contradiction isn't a puzzle to be solved, it is the story, it is the entire point. And if you can sit with that discomfort for the next several minutes, you will understand something profound about how power actually works in any society, including the one you live in right now. Miriam Sultan was born on March 21, 1522, into a world of almost unimaginable luxury and equally unimaginable restriction. Her father Suleiman ruled an empire that stretched from the gates of Vienna to the shores of the Persian Gulf, from the Crimean Peninsula to the deserts of Yemen. Her mother, Miriam Sultan, had accomplished what no woman had managed for over a century, rising from concubine to become the legal wife of a reigning sultan. Miriam grew up in Topkapi Palace, which was not merely a residence, but a political machine designed to concentrate and maintain power through architectural and social mechanisms that made the Sultan's authority visible in every corridor, every courtyard, every carefully calculated sight line. She was educated by the finest tutors in the empire. She learned Arabic, Persian, and Ottoman Turkish. She studied Islamic theology, poetry, music, mathematics, and history. She wore clothing that took teams of artisans months to create, garments so heavy with gold thread and precious stones that standing in them for hours required physical endurance. She lived in rooms decorated with Iznik tiles, gilded ceilings, and windows of colored glass that transformed sunlight into patterns of supernatural beauty. She was called Sultan, a title that placed her on equal footing with her brothers, a privilege granted to imperial daughters only since 1481, when Sultan Bayezid II revolutionized Ottoman protocol by elevating his daughters to true dynastic rank. By every conventional measure, Miriam was among the most privileged human beings alive. She would never know hunger, cold, or the fear of poverty that shaped the lives of the vast majority of people in the 16th century. She would never be denied medical care, education, or the finest material goods the empire could provide. She would wield influence that most men could only dream of, corresponding with foreign monarchs, advising sultans, commissioning architectural masterpieces that would stand for centuries. Yet when her father informed her in early 1539 that he had arranged her marriage to Rustam Pasha, the governor of Diyarbakir, who would soon become Grand Vizier. She had no more actual choice in the matter than the lowest kitchen slave in the palace. This is the central paradox we must understand if we want to grasp the reality of Ottoman princess life. Merimah could refuse the marriage in theory. Ottoman law granted princesses the right to decline betrothals. She ranked higher than Rustam in the imperial hierarchy, a distinction that would be carefully maintained even after marriage. She possessed legal protections that would be extraordinary for any woman in the medieval world. But exercising those rights would mean defying her father the Sultan, which was not merely familial disobedience, but a form of treason against the state itself. It would mean rejecting her duty to the dynasty, which was framed as a sacred obligation blessed by God. It would mean acknowledging to herself and everyone around her that she possessed autonomous desires separate from the will of the men who ruled her life, and that acknowledgement was something the entire system was designed to make psychologically impossible. Rustam Pasha was approximately 40 years old when the betrothal was announced. He had risen through the Devshirme system, taken from his Croatian village as a boy, converted to Islam, and educated in the palace schools that transformed conquered children into the empire's administrative elite. He was brilliant by all accounts, a financial genius who would modernize Ottoman taxation and accumulate a personal fortune that made him one of the wealthiest men in the empire. He was also, by contemporary descriptions, physically unattractive. Rumors circulated before the wedding that he suffered from leprosy. The rumors were significant enough that Sultan Suleiman sent his personal physician to examine the man. The doctor found no leprosy, but did discover a louse in Rustam's clothing despite the man's reputation for changing garments multiple times daily, a detail preserved in palace records because it created scandal among courtiers who saw cleanliness essential to nobility. The wedding was magnificent beyond description, deliberately so. It coincided with the circumcision ceremonies for Merimah's younger brothers Bayezid and Cihangir, creating a festival that consumed 15 days and nights. The celebrations demonstrated Ottoman wealth and power to both subjects and foreign observers. Processions wound through Istanbul's streets carrying gifts whose value was carefully recorded: 52 embroidered kaftans, 130 purses of gold, countless bolts of silk and velvet. Musicians played continuously, poets competed for prizes. Food was distributed to the poor in quantities meant to create stories that would spread throughout the empire. Ambassadors from Venice, France, and the Holy Roman Empire watched and recorded descriptions that would shape European imagination of Ottoman magnificence for generations. But for Merimah, sitting in her carriage covered in fabrics worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime, this was something else entirely. This was the day her childhood ended. This was the day she would be permanently separated from her mother and brothers. This was the day she would move into the palace of a man she did not know, could not refuse, and would be expected to obey in all things despite ranking higher than him in official protocol. This was the day she would discover whether the preparation she had received from senior harem women, preparation that had consumed the 6 months between betrothal and wedding, had actually equipped her for what was about to happen. The preparation was real, though not in the sensationalized form that Western fantasies imagine. There was no formal torture, no systematic breaking of spirits. The conditioning was far more sophisticated than that. It worked through the accumulation of small lessons that began in early childhood and intensified as marriage approached. Merimah had spent years watching her mother navigate the complex politics of the harem. She had observed which behaviors gained favor and which brought subtle punishment. She had absorbed through thousands of interactions the understanding that her value derived from her usefulness to the dynasty. She had been taught by women who genuinely loved her that marriage to a powerful pasha was the highest honor she could achieve, that producing children who would carry dynastic blood was her sacred duty, that any reluctance or resistance was shameful failure that would bring disgrace to her family and herself. In the months before the wedding, this general conditioning became specific instruction. Senior women who had themselves been married to high officials provided guidance that was practical, explicit, and designed to ensure Miriam understood exactly what would be expected of her. They taught her the gestures of wifely submission that Ottoman culture required, how to lower her eyes, how to speak with appropriate deference, how to accept commands without visible hesitation. They explained in clinical detail what would occur on the wedding night and how she was expected to respond. They instructed her to demonstrate gratitude for her husband's attention, regardless of what she actually felt. They framed everything in language of religious duty and wifely virtue. But the substance was clear. Miriam was being taught to dissociate from her own experience and perform according to scripts that served purposes beyond her own well-being. This was not cruelty in the conventional sense. The women providing this instruction genuinely believed they were helping her. They had been through similar preparation themselves. They saw it as necessary, proper, the way things had always been and should always be. They were teaching her to survive in a system they could not imagine questioning. And that is what makes the system so insidious, so difficult for modern people to fully grasp. There was no obvious villain. There was instead a perfectly functioning machine that transformed human beings into instruments of state power. And the machine ran smoothly precisely because everyone operating it believed they were acting with wisdom, care, and proper respect for tradition. As Miriam's carriage approaches Restam Pasha's palace in New Eskudar, across the Bosphorus from the main city, the crowds are still cheering. They see only the magnificence, the bride covered in jewels, the groom who has risen to become the Sultan's right hand, the dynasty strengthened through alliance. What happens next, behind closed doors in private chambers where no official records are kept, will determine whether Miriam's years of preparation have adequately equipped her for the reality of marriage, or whether she will become one of the princesses whose wedding night leaves invisible scars that shape the rest of her life.